Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating contradictions in the entire pet world. It's what we call the goldfish paradox. See, there's this massive, honestly kind of shocking gap between how long we all think goldfish live and their actual biological potential. We've all seen them stuck in tiny little bowls or, won them in a plastic bag at a fair. But the scientific reality of these aquatic creatures, it is entirely different from what popular culture tells us. So we're going to explore exactly how to unlock their true longevity and finally answer the ultimate question. How long do fancy goldfish actually live for?
So, I want to ask you this right off the bat. How long do fancy goldfish actually live? Like, if you were to ask the average person on the street, most people would probably guess just a few months. Or maybe, if they're feeling really generous, a few years. It's just so ingrained in us to think of them as these temporary, disposable pets, right? But the science tells a remarkably different story. Okay, let's dive into this. The pervasive myth out there is that goldfish live for maybe 1 to 3 years. But the reality? 10 to 15 years is actually standard for a well-cared-for fancy goldfish, with many living well into their 20s. And their slim-bodied cousins, the common goldfish, they can actually live for over 40 years. We literally have verified records to prove it. A fish kept in a small, unfiltered bowl usually only survives a year or two, which, is exactly where that sad myth comes from. But in the right environment, these fish possess a longevity that genuinely rivals cats and dogs.
To understand how to achieve this, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll examine the short-lived pet myth. Then, we'll define exactly what a fancy goldfish is. From there, we'll scientifically break down the anatomy of aging, the environment equation, feeding for a long life, and finally, the actionable path to 2 decades. We're going to break down exactly why they often die young and precisely how to prevent it.
Section 1. The short-lived pet myth. Let's debunk the bull.
To understand why goldfish have acquired this completely unfair reputation, we really have to listen to the experts. Dr. Jessie Sanders from Aquatic Veterinary Services puts this brilliantly. She notes that when a client says their 3-year-old goldfish died of old age, they usually don't realize that fish was barely out of its teenage years. A fish dying at 3 years old is actually a premature tragedy, not some biological norm. We have got to completely reset our expectations of what a natural lifespan looks like for these animals.
Section 2. What are fancy goldfish? It's really a hobby within a hobby.
Now, what's really interesting here is that not all goldfish are the same. Fancy goldfish require highly specialized care compared to those slim-bodied common ones you might see out in a pond. Centuries of selective breeding in Asia have created vastly different lifespans and totally unique physical vulnerabilities across the fancy breeds. Take the Rukin and Aranda. They can comfortably hit 10 to 15 years, but they deal with extreme body height or these fleshy head growths called a wen. Then you have the Ranchu missing a dorsal fin entirely, which lives about 8 to 15 years. And the bubble eye? With those incredibly delicate fluid sacs right beneath its eyes, it has a shorter maximum potential of maybe 6 to 10 years, purely because of how fragile it is.
Section 3. The anatomy of aging. The biological costs.
We have to shift our focus to the biological costs of these aesthetic mutations and how they directly impact the goldfish's physical health over time. One of the absolute biggest physiological hurdles is swim bladder disorder, or SBD. See, the shortened, rounded, egg-like bodies of fancy goldfish create this severe internal crowding. Their organs are basically squashed together, which can displace or deform the swim bladder. That's the organ responsible for keeping the fish upright and stable in the water column. And because of this, SBD is a massive obstacle to their longevity.
It's really important to remember that we're looking at the result of 1,200 years of selective breeding. 1,200 years! And it prioritized aesthetics over structural hardiness. By selecting for double tails, missing dorsal fins, and dramatic head growths, human breeding has fundamentally compromised their natural resilience. They're just no longer the hardy wild carp they descended from, which makes optimizing their everyday environment absolutely critical.
Section 4. The environment equation. Let's talk about the environmental cheat codes.
Because their anatomy is so compromised, we basically have to provide environmental cheat codes to keep these delicate, selectively bred fish thriving. Think of a goldfish's metabolism like a ticking clock. Since they're cold-blooded, the water temperature literally dictates the speed of their biological clock. Warm water, so anything above 77 degrees Fahrenheit, massively accelerates their metabolism. That leads to cellular oxidative stress and ultimately a much shorter life. On the flip side, cool water, between 64 and 74 degrees, slows their metabolism down. It preserves their cells and extends their life. Interestingly enough, many commercially bred fish are raised in warm water to force rapid growth, which can sadly permanently cap their lifespan.
So the crucial point here is the number 20. A single fancy goldfish needs an absolute minimum of a 20-gallon filtered tank just to survive. Let me repeat that, 20 gallons. This completely and utterly debunks that lethal goldfish bowl myth. Bowls just don't have the surface area for oxygen exchange or the water volume to dilute toxic waste. Without at least 20 gallons of space, a fancy goldfish simply cannot reach its biological potential.
And within those 20 gallons, your water quality targets have got to be precise. Ammonia? It must be absolute zero. Even trace amounts of ammonia can literally burn their delicate gills. Nitrite must also be absolute zero. And nitrate should be kept below 20 parts per million. Fancy goldfish produce a massive bioload, meaning a whole lot of waste. Pristine, highly filtered water is really the only way to dilute that waste and prevent deadly gill damage and severe neurological stress.
Section 5. Feeding for a long life. Diet and longevity.
Diet is another highly controllable factor that dramatically influences how long a fancy goldfish will actually survive. And guys, here is a wild biological quirk. Goldfish literally do not have a stomach. It's true. Digestion is a slow, continuous process that happens entirely in their intestinal tract. This unique anatomy makes them super susceptible to constipation and bloating. If they're fed the wrong foods or if they eat floating flakes that cause them to gulp air at the surface, it can quickly trigger those swim bladder issues we talked about earlier. So sinking pellets and vegetables are vastly superior.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact nutritional breakdown an adult fancy goldfish actually needs. Notice that massive 30 to 45% chunk dedicated strictly to protein. Then we have 5 to 10% lipids, or fats, with fiber and carbohydrates both kept strictly under 10%. While juvenile fish need very high protein to grow, adults need this moderated, balanced diet to prevent taxing their liver and avoid fatty liver disease.
Section 6. Path to 2 decades. Actionable protocols. Okay, let's summarize the exact protocols required to reach that 20-year potential. Think of this as your longevity blueprint. First, source from reputable breeders to ensure good baseline genetics. Second, quarantine any new fish for 4 to 6 weeks. This blocks parasites from getting into your main tank. Third, provide 20+ gallons of water per fish. Fourth, feed them sinking pellets and roughage, like blanched greens. And fifth, maintain cool, highly filtered zero ammonia water. Getting a fancy goldfish to 20 years old is honestly never a matter of luck. It is a matter of strict, scientific aquatic husbandry.
So I want to leave you with this provocative question. Are you ready for a 20-year underwater companion? Because when we strip away all the myths, we realize the fancy goldfish isn't just some disposable decoration meant to last a few months. It's a highly specialized, historically rich animal that requires a serious long-term pet commitment. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this totally changes the way you look at the incredible goldfish.